Today we're here to wrap up my reading for the month of March, which, I don't know. It's a weird month because I'm doing some longer term projects that involve me reading some very long books that I finished a couple of them, but not all of them. So in my mind, I'm like, I don't feel like I finished that much. But then I look at the stats and I guess I did technically finish 19 books and 19 new books, 21 with rereading. It does not feel that way. I think a lot of that happened in the front half of the month because the back half of the month I've been doing a lot of longer book reading. And also the mental health, we're still on the struggle bus. So it didn't feel like I was live, laugh, loving in March, but I guess actually not by the numbers. It wasn't as bad as it felt like it was. I'm really struggling, guys. But c'est la vie. Life is life. This too shall pass. So, I guess let's dive into some overall statistiques. So like I mentioned, I did read 19 new books and then I had 2 big rereads, which we'll talk about. So total of 21 books. I read 6,181 pages and the average book length was 294. That is very skewed by some DNFs that we will talk about. And then the average amount of time books have been on my TBR was a few years, almost 3 years, which makes sense because I've been reading some books I've had for a long time. And then the average age of book I read was 18 years old. So that was great. Read a couple of older books this month that skewed that. The total amount I spent was $132 on books that I read this month. So the average cost for books that I paid for was $13.20. The overall blended average is $6.29. And then here's the most telling thing is that if I included DNFs, my average rating would be 3.18, which is pretty bad. But if I don't include DNFs, because those are 0 stars on my spreadsheet, the average was 3.78, which that I think kind of reflects, I was reading some things that I absolutely loved this month, and I was also reading some things that I did not enjoy at all. So, duality, that was sort of the name of the game this month. So, let's take a look at the books that I read these are the books, the total books that I read in general. And then these are the books that I read for challenges. In particular, I have 4 arcs that I need to talk to you guys about. So let's start with that. So first of all, The Gathering by CJ Tutor was an interesting book. Also, I'm going to drink coffee while we talk because this is before work and I'm needing some caffeine. The Gathering by CJ Tutor I enjoyed. I thought it was fun. It's a murder mystery. It's like a police procedural. Like, it is a murder mystery for sure. But it's in this remote town in Alaska and it's in a world where there are vampires. And the vampirism is sort of like, I think it's meant to be a metaphor for sort of indigenous oppression. So I think that was interesting. So it's sort of like a horror mystery, which the more I'm like specifically reading horror and trying to like be thoughtful about what I like in horror, I'm realizing more and more that horror mystery is like a real sweet spot for me. So I enjoyed that. I think the kind of pacing of the book was not my favorite. Like, this isn't one of my favorite CJ Tutor books, but it was very entertaining. I don't know, I think it kind of implies that there's going to be a series by the end, and I'm not sure that I would continue in the series, but it was an entertaining book. I think if you like that kind of like murder mystery, but with like, so yeah, it does seem to be the beginning of a series. I don't know that I would continue in that series. But I did very much enjoy this. I think CJ Tutor tends to be a very, like, I've never read a bad book from her to date. So she's pretty reliable, I think, in terms of the quality of her output. I do think if you were expecting horror from this book, you would be disappointed because I think it's more a murder mystery with horror as opposed to a horror with murder mystery, if that makes sense. But yeah, I like this one, would recommend. I also read The Ghost Station, or just Ghost Station by S.A. Barnes. I did not read Dead Silence, though I did listen to a very entertaining podcast doing a full recap of it. that I very much enjoyed. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'm intrigued to try something from this author based on listening to like a pretty detailed recap of that book. So I was intrigued. I was ready to like this. And it also is sort of like a speculative murder mystery, which is definitely kind of like buzzword for me. This was fine. It was not very well written, I didn't think. Like it was entertaining enough to finish. Like it was fine to pass the time. But the pacing was really weird. The main character was the trope of too stupid to live. Very that. Like yeah, I don't know. I think I put something in my review of like, they were dedicated to making the least reasonable decision at every possible point, which like, I get characters making bad decisions in like an intense situation, but there has to be a balance. Like if this person is supposed to be a very learned doctor and have some level of like intelligence or like competence, at some point you're just like, okay, but you never do something reasonable ever. So I don't know. It was fine, but I wouldn't necessarily like recommend it to seek out. If that makes sense. Like, it was a B. It was okay. I won't remember it in a month or two. Actually, very similar for The Game Changer by Lana Ferguson. I picked this up because I really enjoyed Fake Mate, which was a paranormal rom-com, and it really, really worked for me. The Game Changer was just, it was fine. It was a contemporary romance with like a fake dating trope. I barely remember it already. Like it's 3 stars, it's whatever. I think the special sauce of Fake Mate was the paranormal element, so I don't think I would reach for anything from her that didn't include that based on this outing. Like it was fine. I'm not mad at it, but whatevs. And then finally I did read Mirrored Heavens by Rebecca Roanhorse, which is the finale to her Between Heaven and Earth trilogy. So that was the 2 big rereads I did. I reread Black Sun, which I still give 5 stars to, and then I reread Fevered Star. Then I read Mirrored Heavens. So I will say, like, I'm trying to think of how to frame this, because my overall feeling coming out of it is like, God, I love that trilogy. It was so good. I really enjoyed it. I love Rebecca Roanhorse. She really is one of my all-time favorite authors. If you saw my recent favorite authors video, like there's a reason she's in it. I love the way she does characterization and theming and world building. I like her plots. I love her whole deal. I am 100% into her whole deal. But I will say this was the weakest of the 3 books in my opinion. I think it's significantly longer than the first 2. And I think it would have benefited from either getting a pretty aggressive edit to make it similar in length and reduce the scope, or being broken into 2 different books and fleshed out a little bit more. I think it's sort of in this weird in-between space in terms of the pacing, and it kept it from being great, but I would still give it like an A-. So I give Black Sun 5 stars, Fevered Star 4.5 because of my definition of like one of the best things I read that year, and I think it was, but like not a strong 4.5. And then I would give Mirrored Heavens 4 stars. So I am not like disappointed coming out of it by any means. I do think it's the weakest of the 3, and I do think pacing kind of let it down. But I think part of it is what I'm really invested in that trilogy are the characters, and I really loved the stuff that happened with the characters. So the plot and pacing was not as strong, but the character stuff was still great for me, especially my girl Shyla, obsessed with her. Again, 100% into her whole deal. And I really liked the stuff that was going on with her and our crowman. Good, like A- is how I would describe this book. But for me, Black Sun was an A+. So in that sense, a little bit of a letdown, but overall, I'm just like, okay, great. Now what's next from you, Rebecca? Like, what else are we getting? So, okay, those are the arcs that I read. Okay, and then I had a couple of superlatives that I thought we could go over. First off, we've got Prince of Fools by Mark Lawrence, which is the first, well, okay, so it's the first in this trilogy, but I'll leave that for a different video. All that to say, I do think that this book was kind of ruined for me by Joe Abercrombie, because I was like, yeah, this is fine, but like Joe Abercrombie is better. So I guess Lana's happy somewhere by me saying that. But yeah, I mean, I'm even looking at this, like the writing was good. Yeah, I just don't think the story captured me. Most WTF superlative is going to Bunny. If you saw the vlog I did with my critter vlog, I go into this in a lot of detail, so I'll just say this is most WTF. This is the book that I was torn between, like, is this a 5-star or like a 1-star? I don't know. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's a very polarizing book. Even in my comment section, so many people were like, I effing hated that book. And then other people were like, oh, I loved it, but everybody in my book club hated it. So, you know, I think that this is, it's a strong flavor. And you might like the flavor and you might not. But it was definitely very interesting. So this is my most WTF book. And then my most impressive book I'm going to give to The Beekeepers Apprentice by Laurie R. King. Again, I talk about this in more detail in that critter vlog, so I will mostly refer you there. But I will say that this is so well written. The writing is so impressive. And then the fact that this is a Sherlock Holmes fanfiction kind of book, that's just hard to get right. There's a lot of Sherlock fanfiction books out there, and they are of wildly varying quality, and this is, yeah, probably the best one I've read. Yeah, there's still a couple of like really big ones that I haven't encountered. The one I'm thinking of is Sherry Thomas's Sherlock series, which somebody reminded me of in the comments, and I was like, oh yeah, I meant to get into that series and give it a try. But from what I have read as of now, this is the most impressive one in terms of its writing and evocation of the Holmesian character. So, and also Mary Russell as her own character is very compelling. So yeah, this was great. I'm not going to continue in the series. I talk about that in the video, but this, well, I have one other thing I'm going to read, but this was great. So glad I read this. 4.5 stars. One of the best things I've read this year for sure. Okay, and then we get to my most favorite and least favorite, my most recommended and least recommended. So let's start with most and least recommended. Most recommended, I'm going to say, is The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan. I loved this. This has been, I pre-ordered this, so it's been languishing on my TBR for like 4 years. I just loved this, and this is, the reason I call this my most recommended is because it blends Courtney Milan's super sharp writing. Like, her writing is, I think, some of the very best in romance. I think her as like a technician, she's just great. And she always has a lot of theme work in her books. They're usually pretty emotional reads. And this one definitely still had emotion to it, but it was Courtney Milan in a much more like lighter tone. And I loved that. I loved getting that from her. It was just like a much more me book from one of my favorite authors. And that just felt great. And I really recommend this if you were looking for historical romance that has like conversation about class and race, because our heroine is Chinese and, or like is a Chinese, was she born in China? She is of Chinese descent. Her parents definitely are immigrants. And the Duke is biracial, so like you get a kind of automatic discussion of class and race because she is not noble, he is. They've known each other for a long time, but she's never taken him seriously because he's such just sort of like a trickster, lighthearted golden retriever, and he's never told her that he's a duke. So he's like, finally like, I am ready to lock this down and I gotta prove to her that I'm serious, but also I've not told her I'm a duke and I don't know how that's gonna go over. So it's not as intense as some of her other books, but it still has the beautiful writing, the great themes, the banter. Like, it has everything that I love about her writing, but with like a lighter plot. So if you're like me and struggle with like heavier historicals because they just are not always for you, this is one I would really recommend giving a try. I just thought it was delightful, and the final like comeuppance scene was delicious. I loved it. Anyway, this was so great. Very much what I needed. Least recommended is another one from the Critter vlog. And I'm not saying that this is bad or horrible. I'm just wanting to add a layer of like, this is such a hyped book that many consider to be a modern classic. I anticipate that this probably will sort of become a classic in terms of like this trilogy being taught, whatever. But it was not for me. So Wolfhaul by Hilary Mantel, I don't really get it, because the thing that I think is impressive is the detail and the research, but the writing I think is really dry for my taste. I think that it's also like unclear at times, like you can't always tell who is who. And I just don't totally get who this is for, because if you love the Tudors or you love history, you know a lot of this already. But if you don't, I don't think this is a super entertaining version of it. So I'm very confused. I'm just confused. I am confusion about this particular book. It wasn't for me, but I did have so many people in the comments being like, oh, that's such a bummer. I love that book. So I know that it is for other people, but I also had an equal number of people saying, oh, thank God, nobody seems to not like this, but I didn't like it. I just want to like put it out there that this is not as much of a sure thing as it was sold to me as. And yeah, not for me. Glad it's for other people, but yeah, very dry in my opinion. I DNF'd this. This was one of my DNFs. Okay, and then most and least favorite. Least favorite will be my other two big DNFs, which were both from Nora Roberts, and they were both the second books of Paranora series. So Dance of the Gods is in the Morrigan's Cross trilogy, which is like a post-apocalyptic kind of witchy series. And then The Becoming is a fae series. I didn't love either of the first books, but I am trying to read all of Nora Roberts' oeuvre. And I'd put these two on my series reading list for this 6-month period. So I had requests from the library for both of them, and they both came in during this period. So yeah, not for me. I just don't love a Paranora. But I will say, so this is like a theme that I'm seeing of like, the first book I don't love, but can like, I have hope basically coming out of it of like, okay, there's still some interesting things going on here. It's the Nora Roberts writing that I love. You know, maybe this is going to come together in the trilogy. And consistently when I get to the second book, it's like, oh no, it's not. Like, it's the same, but not as good. It's like less. So I just think one book in her trilogies is usually about as much as I want. In the name of the project, I will continue to read try my very best anyway, to read the first full book of these Paranora series, just so that I can get a real sense of what it's like, and then better about DNFing the second one if I need to, because it effectively means I'm also DNFing the third one, so I don't want to just like write a whole trilogy off without really giving it a good shake. But I feel like getting through a full book of a trilogy and then not getting through the second one, that feels to me fair, that I gave it my best shot. And God forbid someday we're not going to have any more Nora Roberts books. So maybe at some point I will revisit these and try to get through them. But her speculative writing just in general isn't for me. I can deal with it if it's a kind of a more truly paranormal element as opposed to a fantasy or a sci-fi element. Well, but I love her in-depth sci-fi stuff. I don't know. Her high fantasy stuff doesn't work very well for me, is I guess the takeaway. And yeah, those are two big DNFs. I guess those are two series off of my series to read lists, but I need to go through and figure out how many more of these are out there, and maybe I'll just try to like speed run them a little bit so that I can get back to the stuff from her that I really like, which tends to be the like mystery stuff and suspense stuff and contemporary romance stuff. That tends to be more what I want from her. Yeah, maybe I just need to do a little knockout of the series that I think I'm less likely to enjoy. So anyway, both of those were least favorites for the month, and I DNF'd both of those. So between that and Wolfhaul, that is what brought my overall rating down so much, because all of those I made meaningful enough progress in to count in my read list. And then my most favorite, I'm delighted to report, is a sequel, and it is Everyone on This Train is a Suspect by Benjamin Stevenson. To me, I think this is better than the first one. The first one I gave 4 stars to, mostly because I had some issues with the writing in it. I just couldn't, I found it a little like clunky and choppy in places, and it kind of took me out of the story. This, I felt like that was much better. There were still some places, but in general, I felt like the writing was a lot smoother, and in the text, it calls out that the writing is better. So maybe he was aware that that was a problem in the first book. I don't know. But this is the same dude from the first one. He, you know, published his book, so he's kind of like doing different writing events, and he gets asked to be a member of a panel on this train, you know, a la the Murder on the Orient Express. That's sort of the vibe. And it's with these other mystery writers, each of which is like in their own distinctive genre. And eventually, obviously, someone dies. And so then all of the mystery writers are like, haha, here's our chance to prove ourselves. So I just thought that this had a different kind of metatextual quality to it that was still really successful. So I'm impressed by that. I really do love books set on trains, murder mysteries set on trains. That is a trope that I very much enjoy. So for that part of it, I just was a sucker for it. I thought that it had some fun, like, moments in it, especially the very last one. I thought was very fun if you've read it. So yeah, I just had a great time reading this. It was a pleasure and a delight. 4.5 stars, and definitely like my favorite thing I read this month. I'll be curious to hear from people who liked the first book better than I did, if they like this the same, more, or less. Because I really enjoyed the first one, but I like this one significantly better. So I don't know. Anyway, favorite. And that is all I've got for you guys today. Let me know what you thought about any of the books I mentioned. Got some big project stuff I'm still working through, but I think you'll start to see some of those videos in April. Writing a lot, so I've been doing a lot of audio, writing a lot. I don't know. We'll see how April goes. Hopefully a little bit better. The sun is out, so hopefully that will also improve spirits here in the Likewell household. But all that to say, let me know what you guys thought about any of the books I talked about. Hope you're doing well. Like, subscribe. Sometimes I'm on social media, though not as much these days. And, you know, hit the bell if you care about that. Yeah, all that good stuff. I hope you guys are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon.